to say a few things from my thesis, my published thesis about the north wall of Agrippa I, the third wall of Jerusalem. So Josephus relates that a strong wall with towers was begun by Agrippa and then halted by the Emperor Claudius when Marsus complained about it. And a little afterwards, Agrippa suddenly died. And we can say more about that in another video. But around 20 years after his death, the first Jewish revolt against Rome began. And one of the main reasons for it, according to scholars, is grief and shock over Agrippa's death. Not only was he popular with what we mean by the Jews is the Orthodox or traditional Jews. He was liberal Jewish himself, Roman Jewish, but also the shock of Judea losing its autonomy because it once again reverted to provincial status under Rome, and Agrippa's son, Agrippa II, was not able to continue to rule. Rome withheld his inheritance from him. So the Jews then, the rebels, that is, according to Josephus, rapidly finished the wall. So it was built in a very strong way by Agrippa. It was halted, and then the higher levels of the wall were built in haste in a disorganized fashion by the rebels, and this is confirmed by the archaeological record. And then as for Robinson, what we're speaking of here, in 1841, he described a zigzagging wall line. And in the 19th century, archaeological remains were usually much more clear and complete. They'd had less opportunity to deteriorate or have people remove parts of them. A lot of parts of the archaeological remains in Jerusalem were removed and used somewhere else. So he described a zigzagging line, and the zigzag refers to the towers. So, and this is on the same further north, more northern line, a few hundred meters on average, but it varies a lot from the wall that goes immediately around the old city of Jerusalem, which was built by Herod the Great. So he describes this, and that also confirms that this would have been the wall because towers were built at regular intervals, according also to Josephus. And let's see here. Yeah, at one point it's 400 meters north of the old city line, built by Herod the Great. And and it continues and passes through the American Consulate and the Albright Institute. The first stones were very strong and well organized. They fit together quite seamlessly, in fact. Another indication and piece of evidence is the 50s coins that date to 50s AD or CE coins dating to after Agrippa's death, found in the northern line remains. And the coins, so that would be after the time, which makes sense strategically to archaeologists for something to be placed after the time that the structure was built. And a coin from the early 40s, CE 41 to 42, to the 6th year of Agrippa's reign, was found in the old city, in the old city's northern wall foundations near the Damascus Gate. So in the same line near the Damascus Gate. And then let's see, Albright. Albright speaks of the wall extending north to opposite the tomb of Helena, the tomb of the kings, and then through the royal grottos to the northeast corner of the temple enclosure, and segments being near the Italian hospitals. So I'm going to show a map in another page. And Sukenik and Meyer, 1920s excavation, let's see. Yeah, they believe that the northwest corner of the wall, including the Sapinus Tower, was in the vicinity of the northeastern corner of the Russian property. And this is where the most recent excavation by Rina and partner was done in 2016, which they state, and I concur, confirms very clearly that this is Agrippa's wall. And we've also talked about this here. I've shown you the images. So let's see. Yeah, tower was uncovered, 12 by 9 meters. The foundation level of megalithic stones. The megalithic stones are a signature stone in Herodian structures, and Agrippa followed them as well. They were done by Herod the Great, but Agrippa also followed them in his structures. And then Rina and Arbive's excavation in 2016. This is the most recent one. It was a rescue archaeology excavation, which they published the site report for. It was performed within the Russian compound. The only section of the western portion of the third wall known today in the area, connecting the towers of Hippicus and Sapinus. So 400 meters northeast of the city wall. That's the wall of Herod the Great that goes close around the old city. So on this slide from my thesis, we begin with a bit of topography about Jerusalem. It's inland, and it was built over two spurs going north to south of a ridge with deep valleys, and therefore this formed a natural protection from assaults on the south, west, and east, but it was undefended on the north. And also on the north, two valleys cut the two ridges. But northwest for 1 kilometer, it was lacking in a natural defense until the Kidron. So there were numerous scholarly debates, very many scholarly debates, beginning in the 19th century and continuing right up until now, with two main stances. the minimalist and maximalist scholars call them. So the minimalist is that the third wall of Agrippa is following the line of the old city of Jerusalem. So that's Herod the Great's wall. And that one goes against what is recorded by Josephus. And Josephus goes into a lot of detail about the wall, as I've said. And he was there. Like, not only did he know Jerusalem, but he was also one of the rebel leaders during the first revolt. And the revolt was only around 20 years after the death of Agrippa. And Josephus is known to be very accurate when he describes things that, or architecture, anything taking place a couple of decades or so before the time he was writing. So when he was small, or a little bit before his birth. He's really accurate, and we believe we can trust him on this, especially as he knew that wall. Um, so, so the maximalist is that the northern wall, what we call the third wall, is the wall built by Agrippa first. And it's around 400 meters, although it varies, north of Jerusalem. So one of the problems with some scholars accepting this wall are generally quite influenced by the fact that the Holy Sepulchre, the church, the sepulchre of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, would be within Herod the Great's wall if the further wall happens to be Agrippa's wall. So if we make Agrippa's wall the one that we believe is Herod's wall, and we place Herod's wall somewhere within these boundaries, and there are other arguments about what is really Herod's wall, then the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which encloses a sepulchre, would be outside Herod's wall. And as you know, the Jews and the Romans did not want burials or death sentences. They didn't want burials to be inside the walls. It was against the rules of both of them, and the laws and the Jewish laws about purity. And a death sentence could not be carried out within city walls, extant city walls too. And that would mean that probably isn't the Holy Sepulchre, unless for some reason it is, but it's inside the walls. Now, the Holy Sepulchre was identified by Constantine and his mother Helena, and he did so based on traditions that continued until the time that his mother visited and investigated. But there was a gap where there was loss of knowledge when Jerusalem became Romanized, when it fell to the revolts, when it fell after the revolts to the Romans and was Romanized. There's a hiatus in information. There is another, there are other proposed locations for the Holy Sepulchre, for Jesus' tomb, and one main one, or the other main one, is the one that is outside the wall, outside Herod's wall and inside Agrippa's wall. So it seems to be a more likely location, and many accept that as the location rather than the Holy Sepulchre. So in that case, we could take the Holy Sepulchre to be symbolic, unless there is some other circumstance, unusual circumstance, where that is his tomb and it's inside Herod's wall. But that wouldn't make logical sense. So Agrippa's wall was built in the 40s, so it was built after um, after Jesus' crucifixion. So placing the wall between Herod's wall and Agrippa's wall would be the logical place for it. And so that explains that problem. Yeah, let's see. And then we have some measurements here of the third wall, which is Agrippa's, what we believe to be Agrippa's wall, what I believe to be his wall, from the war written by Josephus. He has measurements here of 25 cubits, which is about 12.5 meters high, including the battlements and bulwarks, the stones being 20 by 10 cubits, towers 20 by 20 cubits, and so on. You can take a look at that too if you can follow along with me. The excavated width of the maximum wall line is 4.5 meters. That's around 10 cubits. And there are 90 towers, according to Josephus, and that includes the Hippicus and the Sphebinus Tower, 70 cubits high, he says. So what the archaeologists have found with the third wall line is it corresponds really well to what Josephus said. And let's see, he gives also Jerusalem's circumference, 33 stadia or 6 kilometers. So a 6.7 kilometer outer perimeter is reasonable, which would be 3,200 meters, making the distance between the 90 towers around 40 meters, which is similar to the distances between the gate towers following the line of the tower to the east. Yeah, and as I'd mentioned, large ashlar stones are found there, which are typically Herodian. So the stones, the foundation stones, they are the large ashlars, and they fit together seamlessly, and they are sealed with a very strong yellow mortar, which I've mentioned as well. It was so strong that with the archaeologists trying to take apart samples of stones and separate them from the mortar, it was very difficult for them to do using modern technology in the lab. And this also confirms, first of all, that it's using a Roman technology, most probably. And Agrippa was Roman. He'd grown up in Rome from when he was a small child. He identified as Roman. He felt very Roman. I mean, as I've said, it could be that what he was doing with certain activities, other activities as well, just before he suddenly died under questionable circumstances, is he was very ambitious and hoping perhaps carefully to see if he could expand his reign, but his domain, perhaps, or his influence in the region and not his domain, but still perhaps in keeping with friendship with Rome. Um, it wouldn't have made sense for him to cede a small country from the Roman Empire, with Parthia next door. But I mean, there's many different ways to look at it, and it's very complex. And we can't get into too much of that right now. Um, so Josephus speaks of joinings of similar high quality to those of the Jerusalem temple. And by the way, about the megalithic stones, we've also found those in Berytus and Herod the Great, and also it seems Agrippa I, because there's a commemoration plaque to his having built in Berytus. Berytus is Beirut, modern Beirut. Roman Berytus was a Roman city. So they built parts of the Baalbek temple outside Berytus. They were liberal Jews, so they still, archaeology demonstrates that they still followed the Jewish laws in the basic way, privately, when they didn't have to hide how they were really feeling. Agrippa seemed a little bit more into following the Jewish laws, and he was quite popular with the Jews. And people were very religious then. Agrippa was very religious. They seem to have had a more eclectic view, where they accepted the gods of Rome and they accepted Hashem as well. So, or at least tolerated other beliefs, perhaps seeing it as one and the same God, perhaps. Different cultures' way of seeing the same God, something like that. So here we're speaking about the joinings. So in the 2016 excavation, I mentioned the mortar is extremely strong, even by modern technical standards, but we know that the Romans were extremely advanced technologically, including with architecture. And Agrippa was very well educated. He grew up as part of the Julio-Claudian extended family, who was educated along with the Julio-Claudian princes and princesses. So he had very good education. So let's see. Alarmingly strong. Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, the temple had strong joinings as well. Okay.